Alrighty. So before we get too far into this, essentially what I have is pulled in, well, first of all, the audio is coming just from the Mac speakers. So if it sounds a little bit crazy, I apologize, and not professional on that side of things. It's the best I can do for now. In terms of the audio that we're going to use to demonstrate parallel compression, I have two different Apple loops. That was also the best I could do. And I have them broken into two different parts, a down part and an up part, essentially like the harder strum. And then this is also a harder strum. So I wanted to simulate a kind of what it would be like if somebody was playing softer. So I brought both the gain level down on both of them actually, but more so on this one. And then I also put an EQ curve on it that it ducked that down, essentially just kind of making it sound a little bit more like an acoustic guitar when it's playing soft, right? Because if somebody's picking, it's a lot more of a round, soft sound than if they're strumming with a pick, right? So that's what I tried to simulate, to emulate there, was the difference of somebody playing something soft and then somebody playing something loud, so that we had a full dynamic range that also represented a little bit of the frequency type response. It's not perfect, but I think it does a great job. The explanation really works with this setup. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to play for you this clip, quiet and loud, just so you can hear what it sounds like. We're going to bring the compressor up on this channel, and we're going to leave it off for the first pass. And then, as it goes for its second pass, I'm going to turn it on so you can hear the difference with putting parallel compression on this, and then we'll dive into the weeds and I'll explain how that happened. So before we do that, maybe we should rename acoustic with an O in there. There we go. Okay, here we go. All right, so what you should have been able to hear is that the second pass, this quiet part, was much louder. What I'm going to do now is play the individual parts and turn it on and off so you can hear the distinct difference. And I want you to pay attention down here to the gain reduction that's represented on the graph. All right, so let's play the up part, the strumming, the intense part first. I'll toggle it on and off as it's playing. So you should have heard very minimal level difference, if any, where one of them had a little bit more life on it, the compressed signal. You could hear maybe a little bit more articulation, but it wasn't louder than the other one. Now we're going to play the soft, and you're going to hear a massive difference between the dynamic levels when it's off and on. Okay, here we go. So that's a big difference. And what you should have also noticed if you were looking at the graph is there was not any reduction happening. So essentially what we have is parallel compression giving us this effect of squashing the dynamic range of the instrument at play without killing the life or the attack of that instrument. How is this possible? Well, essentially, we squash super hard and heavy the parts of the signal that are loud, and we do that with a fast attack, and in this case, with this instrument, a slow release. So it's like bringing the fader down when it's loud and holding it under. And then when it's soft, it's not compressing at all. And we blend in the dry, this is where the parallel part comes in, we blend in the dry signal so that the loud part that's getting squashed to death and held under now has the attack and the life of the original signal, which was loud to begin with, right on top of it. And so it doesn't make it any louder because we're reducing it with the compression, but we're adding back in the life and the volume that it used to have on top of it. And because we're not compressing the quiet signal, now when we add that makeup gain to the signal, now it's just bringing up that uncompressed sound, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play, just so you can hear the aggressiveness of the fast, the hard playing, the bright, intense playing. I'm going to bring the release shorter just so that for this instrument, this acoustic guitar, you can hear how it is actually quite aggressive, but it's not coming off quite as aggressive because the release is slow. So that's the first thing I'm going to show you. That's part of the effect with this instrument. By masking that pumping effect, by kind of having a long release, we can get away with this parallel compression, okay? So I'm going to make it quicker, and then I'll make it longer. So you should have heard when it was a quicker release, even though the mix was a blend of the two, it was super obvious that it was pumping, and that's what we were trying to mask with the original signal, was this pumping effect. Because every time the strum dug into the strings, it came back so quick that there was this swell of sound before the next sound would get squashed. So when you're doing parallel compression, oftentimes a longer release and a quicker attack can help to subdue the loud parts of the signal and let the original signal kind of be added back with a more natural sound, okay? I'm also going to go between the dry and the wet signal, or the input, the dry input, and then the output, the affected compressed signal. We'll do that with the loud signal here. So there you could hear how one was just the dry signal, the other was just this compressed signal that you could hear some pumping, but it was not really that much quieter. The makeup gain was bringing back, and that's a key component to how this effect works, is you're bringing back essentially everything that you've lost with the makeup gain, so that you're not losing any volume in the loud parts, essentially, but you are gaining tons of volume with the quiet parts. And I'll demonstrate this even at 60% mix, not even 100%, I'll demonstrate that with the quiet, okay? By bringing the makeup you can see here in the loud parts, the makeup it's being brought down by about 15. We're compressing by like 15 decibels. So the makeup gain is 15, okay? So we're going to leave that makeup gain at 15, and then we'll go to the soft part where it's not being compressed at all, and you'll realize that we're just gaining 15 dB of audio from the soft signal, and I'll bring that up and down. You'll hear the difference. Okay, so I hope it's starting to like make a little bit more sense now, how we're kind of fitting the puzzle pieces together and where we're getting that volume in the lower parts from. We're adding that makeup gain, but when we're playing the loud parts, or the person on stage is just ripping into it, you're adding back with makeup gain exactly what you're losing. So you're not changing the volume of the loud parts, but you are changing the volume of those quiet parts. But then there's that problem, right? Well, it's going to sound super compressed, and that's where you hold it underwater with a long release, and then you add back in with your mix knob that dry signal. Now I'm doing 60% of the affected signal because I really want to get some volume out of those quiet parts. If I have it completely dry, then it's like we're not even using this effect. So I want to mix in that affected signal so I get some of that 15 dB, but I don't want all of it because I want to make sure that the life of that dry signal is there to support those compressed parts, right? So I'm putting it like a 60%. You could easily do parallel compression at a 50% ratio. That would be perfectly fine. But in this case, I wanted to have a little bit of that. I just wanted it 60. I wanted it leaning a little bit more towards the compressed sound, because I didn't want it to be completely dynamically squashed either. You know, I didn't want it to be with no dynamic range where we're getting the complete 15 dB back. I wanted just some of that, a lot of it back. And we're going to listen to the whole thing now with the soft and the hard parts playing. And we're going to just turn off the compressor, turn it back on again. And one thing I want you to recognize while this is happening is also a key feature that comes on most modern compressors, which is your filter, okay? And you can find that in Logic in the side chain window. The detection type is peak. Often you'll have the chance to choose between the peak or RMS detection. RMS meaning a more average detection, peak being that it's listening to those initial transients. With an acoustic guitar, for sure, you'd want to use peak because there's a ton of transient, quick peaking parts of that instrument, so you want to catch them right away. So we'll use peak. And then the filter here it's listening to I have it a band pass, so it's a bell curve. It's listening to things that are around 6K, and that is to accentuate even more so the fact that we only want to bring down the parts where the player is strumming hard, because when they strum hard you get more string, you get more resonance and bite, and we can actually listen to that if we use our filter listen option. This would be like using a pre-fader engaged on a console where you're listening to just the filter part of it. And so this is we're just going to hear just the 6K that the compressor is listening to. Right? So when you can hear that now, okay, it makes more sense why there's such a distinction between what the compressor is actually compressing, because it's really just listening to things that are intense. And again, that's why I used an EQ on that softer part, not only ducking the level because it's not as loud, but also the harshness of this one because it was actually a full strum. And typically, if somebody's going to be playing quieter, they're also not going to be playing with as much harsh timbre. So you can use the filter on your compressor to further accentuate the separation of your loud and your soft parts. In general, I guess across the board, things that are played quieter are typically warmer, and things that are played louder are typically more harsh. Like, think about a vocalist. When they're really belting, 3K is going to come right at you. Think about a snare. When they're just doing soft rolls, you're going to get plenty of that 500, 1K, But when they hit it really hard, you're going to get the crack of 4K and 8K coming right at you. And so you can use a filter on a compressor to further accentuate that and help the compressor listen to and grab what you want it to grab. So here we go. Soft and bright. We'll turn the compressor on and off just to hear the effect of parallel compression, really squashing the dynamic range but keeping the life. Okay, now we're going to do something that's a little bit extra, but if you're running your instrument, in this case the acoustic guitar, through a bus, or you have an opportunity live on a console that can facilitate it, you can add like a secondary compressor or an insert of a limiter, something like that. Then if you want to get even more dynamic range out of it without bringing your mix knob or your parallel compression essentially to a 50% ratio, and you wanna blend it, but you still want to get a little bit more of that bite off the top, a limiter can be a great way to kind of subtly just bring even more dynamic, kind of squashing the dynamic range just a little bit more without killing the sound. You got to be careful with limiting, that you don't limit too much, but in this case I'm going to add a limiter as well to this sound, and we're just going to, again, it's not going to bring the level up or down, it's just going to bring out more of that soft signal and attenuate just the tops of that signal. So we'll bring this limiter, same thing, just listen through in and out so you can hear the difference. Okay, so if we were doing this live, we probably wouldn't be able to get away with essentially adding 18 decibels of added volume to the signal. You might start to have a feedback effect. So this has been a really extreme example of how you can do this. You probably wouldn't want to compress with your threshold quite as much. You wouldn't want to get 15 dB of reduction. Maybe you'd want to get 9 dB of reduction and add back with your makeup gain 9 dB and then run the mix at 60% at that point, right? So you're not driving it quite as hard. But I wanted to really hit home the fact that if you're using a compressor and a limiter in that way, and you're going after a paralleled type compression, you can get tons of dynamic range back in the signal by squashing that like that. And you don't even have to kill the life of the instrument. Like this acoustic guitar, when it's playing big, doesn't sound like it's getting killed. There's plenty of attack represented there. It doesn't feel lifeless, and it doesn't sound like it's pumping because we have a slow release. And the quiet parts, there's plenty of volume there, especially compared to both the limiter and compressor being off versus them being on. Let's just play it with them both off and both on. That's a huge difference. Something that I threw on just to kind of give you an example of what can happen when you do squash that dynamic range a lot is you can end up getting more of the woody or warm or non-transient type of signals that are a cohesive part of that instrument coming out now, especially in this acoustic guitar. That life that you're hearing when you compress it a real ton can also accentuate some of those woody and maybe undesirable tones. So you have to be careful how much you want to compress in parallel. But if there are more tones that come out that you don't like, then you can always put an EQ on to try to take care of some of those woody or maybe abrasive things that show up that are just inherently in somebody strumming a guitar, for example. So we'll put this EQ on. We'll just do a quick A/B of all these plugins off and all those plugins on. All right. Well, there you go. I think that wraps up parallel compression. It's about the best example I can give to explain how that works. Feel free to let me know what questions you have, and we can do a different video on a different type of compression or a different instrument if you'd be interested to see something like that.